Hello everybody, welcome back to, I guess this would be the 0.5th part of this tutorial. I think I just forgot to mention last time, you can scroll with your mouse wheel, and then with right click or middle click, you can pan around. You can also pan with holding space and left clicking. If you're on a laptop, I guess that would be easier. So we're going to create a small program where you have a button on the screen. When you click that button, it'll increment a number by 1. It's a good starter project just to get your bearings around the editor. So we don't need our sprite. I'm going to delete that. I just right-clicked and now I can delete. Yes, I'm sure. The first thing we want to do is add our button. I don't know why I keep doing that. That's not important. So if I click on Node 2D and hit this plus, I could also do Control A to add. It gives me, see, I tried recording this a few times. It's already up. It's already giving us this option of all of our nodes. So I want to mention that all 2D nodes inherit from node 2D, and they're all blue. All 3D nodes inherit from spatial, they're all red. And all user interface nodes inherit from control, and they're all green. So we want a button. It would be under base button, and it would just be this button. So that's there. I'm going to hit W so I can move it. I'm going to move it right there. There are better ways to do this, but for the sake of the tutorial, let's just do it right there. And then we want to add some text to the button. I'm just going to add a little caret there. So that text is actually being displayed, but it's very small and it's hard to see. So if we want to change that, we need a custom font. So I'm going to go to Google Chrome. I'm going to go to fonts.google.com, I think it is. Okay. And I'm going to search for just Roboto. This is the font, and I'm going to download the family. And I'm just going to minimize Godot. This opens too, just minimize it. I'm going to move that here. If I open that up, it gives me all these files. I really only need one. So I'm going to open it, I'm just alt-tabbing into Godot. And then I'm going to right-click on Res and say Open in File Manager. Minimize that now. So this is all of the files of my game. And then if I just drag, I could copy and paste it, but I'm just going to drag Roboto Black into my files. I can X out of these both. Come back into Godot. And now if I look here, I have robotoblack.ttf. So that is our font file, but we want to apply it. I'm going to hit Q to get out of move mode. We want to apply it to this button. So what we want to do is we want to go to button. We want to scroll down so we have all the things that make it a button, all of the things that make it a base button, and then less specific, all of the things that make it a control. So we have custom fonts as one of our options here. So everything that inherits from control is going to have all of these options. So we have custom fonts. I'm just going to click that drop down. I'm going to click that to activate it. And then we have this empty. So if I click there, it doesn't give me an option to put this file in there. It wants a dynamic font or bitmap font. Now these are resources, TRES files. They can be embedded in our scene file, which is what we're going to do. So we're going to say new dynamic font, and then if I click on this this dynamic font here, it'll actually give me a drop down, and these are all the properties that create this dynamic font. I could also hit this arrow and I could load a new resource. I could edit this resource. I could clear it, which just gets rid of it. I can make it unique, which is very useful if you're using the same resource in multiple places and you want to change just one of them. So for example, if I have a custom font and I use it in 10 different buttons and I make a change to one of the resources, since all of them are referring back to that same file, it's going to change all the buttons. If I say make unique, it'll basically duplicate that font resource and then only make changes to the one that is applied to the button that I'm changing. You could also save it and it'll appear in your file manager, but right now it's just embedded in the scene file, which is fine. So you have your font data, which is what we want. See, if I come here, I want to do font data. That's the same icon that's over here. You could load it, which brings you here. I could come to Res and load it like that, or I could just take it from here and drag it right into that. So see, now this is the right font that we want, but we want it to be a different size. So if I just close that drop down, come into settings, I can change the size. So I'm just going to make it 48. That's good. So now we can close this. we have our button all set up. Now we want to add our text. So if I come back to Node 2D and Control A, we're going to add a label. It's just going to take some time to get used to what the different nodes are, what they do. So right now, label displays a plain text inline or wrapped inside a rectangle. For formatted text, use rich text label. Label is fine for us. We're going to create it. So now our label's up here. I'm just going to drag it right there, and we want to use the same font. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to our button. We're going to go to Custom Fonts. This is our resource, and I'm going to hit this little drop down, and I'm going to say Save. That's going to give us an option, New Dynamic Font.tres. I'm going to change it to Roboto.tres. So this is going to take all of those settings we changed over here, and it's going to put them in a file that we can then use somewhere else also. So I'm going to say Save. It's now right there. I come to Label, I go to Custom Fonts, I check it on. I can now take this TRES file, put it right there, and now it's hard to see because there's no text, but if I start typing, it's Roboto and it's the same size because all of those settings that we changed here are now saved in a file that is applied to our label. So I'm just going to change it to number, and I'm going to just move it over here, and I'm going to change the align to center. So that means if we change this, it'll just be centered. Control Z, to undo, and then we're going to use code to recognize when the button is pressed, and we're going to use it to increment this number. So we want to apply a script to our Node 2D. I'm just going to hit this button right there, and it gives us this whole option, this little window to add a script. So the first option is language. We want GDScript. We also have native script, which is it's a version of C++. You need to be pretty experienced to use it. I have no idea how to use it, so we're going to go with GDScript. We also have visual script, which is block-based programming. It's a visual system where you have units on your screen you can drag around and connect, and it's not as efficient as GDScript, but it's all right if you really don't want to type code. This is very important. This inherits. It needs to inherit from the same type of node that is here. So we're applying this script to a Node 2D, so that means the script needs to inherit Node 2D, which basically means that our script, just like Node 2D inherits from Canvas item, our script is going to inherit from Node 2D, so that it then has all the functionality of Node 2D, all the functionality of Canvas item, all the functionality of Node, but even more specifically, above Node 2D, it's going to have all the stuff that we write in. So that's just how that works. Class name is not applicable for this type of language. Template, we're going to change it. Well, we're not going to change it. We have default, we have empty, we have no comments. We're just going to leave it on default. And then we have a path where we want to save it and what we want it to called. What we want it to be called. We have built-in script. If we toggle that, you can see it says into scene file. So that means instead of saving it as its own file, see this is grayed out, it would be embedded into our scene file. We don't want that right now. We want it to be its own script in our file manager. So if I uncheck that, game.gd is just a fine place. Res game.gd is fine. We can save it there and call it that. It's fine. Script path name is valid. We'll create a new file. We're going to say create. So now our viewport changed to script mode, and we have all this text. Everything with a hashtag mark in front of it is a comment. So all of this is just ignored by the code. So for example, if I just want to remember, if I write a bunch of code and then I want to remember what it does, I can write a hashtag and just say this does something. And that's just a reminder for me. I'm going to erase it. So see, extends Node 2D, which means that it inherits from type Node 2D, which means that this script is going to be applied to something that is a Node 2D. And then we have all of this text here. So this is just an example, but this is some actual code that was just put a comment in front of it. So we have var a equals 2. I'm assuming that you don't have any knowledge in programming, so I'm just going to explain this briefly. Var is a keyword that you must type when you're creating a new variable. A variable is like a box that you can store a value in. The structure of it is you would say var, and then the name of the variable, which in this case is just the letter A, set equal to the number 2. Equal in programming is not a statement, it's an operator. So you're saying take whatever is on the left, which in this case is the variable A, and set it equal to whatever is on the right, which is 2. Here is something kind of similar, but also very different. So variable B equals text. Now why is text in quotation marks? Because we need to know that it's the actual letters that spell out the word text. If, for example, I took out these quotation marks, it would give me an error down here saying the identifier text isn't declared in the current scope, which means that it's looking for something called text, which we didn't create. So if I came up here and I said variable text equals, 5, now when I say text here, see, it highlighted this, it's going to go and find whatever is stored within text, which in this case is 5, and it's going to take that value and it's going to store it within B. If we want the word text, which is of type string, not of a type integer or a float, which is a number with a decimal, we need to put quotation marks around it to tell the code that we want these actual letters to be stored in B. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this code, and we can leave this here. It declares variables. And then we have a function called _ready. Now, this is going to be called automatically by the Godot engine at the very start of our program. See, it tells us right here, it's called when node enters the scene tree for the first time. Not all functions are going to be called automatically. Most of the time, 99% of the time, you need to call them yourself, but chances are, if it has an underscore in front of it, it's what's called a virtual function, which is overriding a function from a parent class. You don't need to understand what that means right now. Basically, in simple terms, node 2D, in the code that creates this node 2D, there's a function called _ready, and we are overwriting it. We're going to say, instead of executing the code that is written inside of the node 2D class, we're going to say write our own. So we could erase this, we could erase that, and it'll run just fine because we're not rewriting the thing that's already existing. I'm going to undo that with Control-Z, and we have our function still. So see, you can have comments in line, so pass basically just means do nothing, and this is just a comment. The reason we have to say pass is because Godot, or GDScript, unlike many other languages, does not use curly brackets in the same way. In something like Java, for example, you would create a function, and you would have to give it a type, so you would say void, and you would say name of function, can't type, and then you would give it, can't type, and you give it curly brackets, and all your code would go in here. Godot, instead of all of that, it uses indented blocks. So as you can see, there's a tab here in between ready and pass. So if I get rid of that, here I'm just going to clear the errors. If I got rid of that, it's going to say indented block expected, which means that if you want your code to be part of this function, you need to indent it. A function is, I'm realizing I didn't explain that, a function is a bit of code that you can repeat and call later without rewriting. So ready is going to contain some code that the editor, that the program Godot, will then execute at the beginning of the game. This down here, process, right now it's commented out. I'm going to get rid of those comments. Process is different. It's called every frame. So if the game runs at 60 frames per second, process will be called at 60 frames per second. But as you can see, process also has something called delta in between the parentheses. Everything, when you're declaring a function, in between the parentheses is the inputs. That means whenever process is called, you need to give it an input called, which it is going to refer to as delta. It's creating a variable called delta, which it will then give a value depending on the input that is determined when the function is called. Right now, delta represents the time in between now and the previous frame, which isn't very important at the second, but that's what it does. I'm going to erase all of this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to replace this line. Instead of saying pass, pass is required because if you don't have this line, it's expecting code part of this function, but there's nothing there. For the same reason you can't have this. It just doesn't see it as part of ready. So I'm going to say print, which is a function itself, part of Godot. I'm going to add parentheses. Whenever you're doing a function, you need parentheses to tell it to execute that code. Otherwise, it thinks it's looking for a variable. You could say print, and print requires an optional input. So see, right now, it's not giving us any problems. You can print just fine, and it'll just do nothing. But if you put something in the inside, like if I say print B, which is declared up here, it's going to give me the word text out at the bottom. So if I say F5 to run, it's going to say text, because I'm taking the word text storing it within B, and then I'm reading that value from B, giving it to print as an input to that function, and then print does some stuff in the background, part of Godot. It displays it down here. I can hit F8. See, if my code is running. If I hit F8, it'll just turn that off. I can also hit the stop icon up here. What we want to do now is we want to tell the code that when that button is pressed, we need to do something. We need to increment a number. What is that number? So we need to tell it, we need to remember what that number is. So I'm going to say up here, var number. I didn't understand. Sorry. var number equals 0. And we need to say, see, right now it doesn't know what B is because we got rid of it. I'm just going to get rid of this line, and I'm going to type pass again. When that button is pressed, we need to add 1 to this number. So how are we going to do that? First, I'm just going to save, Control S. We can do it using the node option down here. So if I come down to my button, these are signals. So signals is part of Godot that is designed to let different nodes over here communicate with each other. So, for example, the pressed signal is emitted from button whenever you press the button. That is just part of Godot. You can create your own signals. We're not going to do that right now. But all we need to know right now is when you press the button, pressed is going to be emitted. So we want to double click on that, and we want to connect that signal. So basically what that means is we're going to tell our code to listen for that signal. So when that signal is emitted, we want to do something. So we're going to come, see, it's connecting from button to node 2D, and we want it to be, we can just leave it as on button pressed, and we're just going to say connect. So now it automatically created a new function for us, and it gave us this icon. If I click on it, it's going to say the source is button, the signal is pressed, and the target is node 2D, which is this. I say OK, just exits out of it. So whenever that button is pressed, it will automatically emit this signal, and then because we told it to, it's going to listen for that signal within this code, and when it hears that signal, when the button is pressed, when that signal is emitted, it will do whatever is part of this function. So right now it's just doing nothing. It's telling us to replace this line with whatever we want it to do, and we're going to do that. So we are going to erase that line, and we want to add 1 to number. So what a lot of people would guess is you would say number plus 1. See, that's actually wrong, because what you're doing here is you're adding 1 to number, and then you're taking that result and doing nothing with it. What we would want to do is we want to take number, and we want to solve for whatever number plus 1 is, and then use the equal operator to store this result, this value, back into number. So then what we can do is I'm going to say print, parentheses, number. So when the button is pressed, we're going to solve for number plus 1, store that result back into number. Now the value of number is no longer 0, it's changed. And then we're going to print down here whatever the new value of number is. So if I hit F5 to run, you can see down here, as I press this button, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not displaying on here, but it's displaying down here. That's what we want right now. We didn't tell it to display on the screen yet. We're just telling it for the coder, which is us, we need to know that that's actually happening. We don't actually need this ready function right now, so I'm going to erase it. And then instead, we only have 1 line left. Instead of printing it to the bottom, I'm just going to erase that. We want to tell this label to update its text. So I'm going to go back to the inspector. We want to change this text property. So if we hover our mouse over it, the property is just called text. So if we get a reference to this label, we can say look within label, find the property text, and change it. So we're going to go to our script again. And since our script is being applied to node, which is a parent of label, we can do this pretty easily. We can say get underscore node, and then we can give it an input. A better way to do that, or just another way to do that, is just to put a $sign. It does the same thing as get node. And then we give it the name. We want to find label. If we changed this to be something else, that code would no longer work. It needs to be the exact name. So I'm going to undo that. It's going to look for the thing called label. You use the dot to say within label, we need to find text. And now we want to set that text equal to number. So we say we find the text, and then we give it a new value, and that new value is going to be number. Now, this probably, depending on what environment you're using, it may or may not work in Godot. See, it does not work. Set text on base label with value type int. That's invalid. So the problem here is that number is a number. It's not text. Label needs text. So we need to convert this value from a value of a number to text. So instead of it being a number like that, we need it to be a number like that. Now that doesn't look very different, but it is, because instead of it being the value 0, it would be the character 0, as you would type. So we need to just say str and wrap that in parentheses. So this is a function. It takes an input and it gives an output. So when a function gives an output, it takes the entire statement and behind the scenes replaces this with whatever the output of this function is. So we give it the input of number, it will convert it into text, and then now, after that's done, this whole statement is equivalent to that, because it converted it to text. And then we're going to take that new value, basically whatever the number is in quotes, and give it to text. We're going to say find label, find the property text within label, give it a new value of whatever the output of this is, which is going to be number in text form. So now if I hit F5, it works. The problem is, when you first run the program, it just says number. We want it to say 0. So if we come here, we can recreate our ready function. So if we say func to create a function, we need to give it a name, underscore ready. Now it needs to be exactly that name, otherwise it will not be called by the editor automatically. Then you need parentheses to tell it that this is a function. You put your inputs in there. Ready does not have any inputs, so that's fine. And then you put a colon to indicate that you're going to have an indented block. And then we're just going to say label, auto completes for us, dot text equals number. At the start, number is 0, so it's going to put 0 in there. And then, of course, we need to convert it to text form like that. So now if we run our program, starts off as 0, hit this button, it'll increase. So I hope that was helpful. I know I didn't go like crazy with it, but and I didn't explain everything, but this is just the basics of how Godot is going to work. So in the first part, we're going to begin. This is the, I guess, half part, but in part 1 of the series, we're going to create a game, a simple game where you move left and right using your mouse, and you have to collect items that are falling from the top of the screen. You just have to, you're controlling, say, an image with your mouse, and there are other images coming down, and when they touch each other, you get a point. And if the image goes off screen, if it passes you and you don't catch it, you lose a point. And let's just say you have 30 seconds to collect as many as you can. So that's what we'll do next part. Alright, thanks for watching. Bye, everybody.